Welcome to the Gist on Strat News Global. I'm Surya Gangadharan, and we are looking at the India-Russia relationship, looking at some remarks by Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Moscow on Tuesday at a media briefing. He referred to India and Pakistan, saying that the two countries could sit together and sort out their problems bilaterally and offer to lend a helping hand. So, was he offering to mediate? This is not something that Russia has apparently offered before, although at least not publicly. There was more about. He also, for good measure, included China in this format, saying that if the three countries sat together, they could sort out their issues and promote better understanding. So let's delve deeper into these remarks. They are by Sergei Lavrov, who is an old campaigner in Russia, and he understands the India relationship well. He also understands the import of his remarks. I have with me Nandan Unnikrishnan of the Observer Research Foundation. He heads the Russia Studies program there, knows Russian, travels to Russia frequently. So, Nandan, what's your take on what Lavrov said in Moscow?
Surya, I belong to the group of skeptics, so I don't think we should be making much of his remarks because, in a sense, he's basically reiterated the traditional Russian position that all problems can be sorted out between India and China and Russia, Pakistan through conversations, and that Russia is always happy to facilitate these conversations as distinct from mediation. So this is a friendly nudge, as it were, to push these countries to try and sort out their issues bilaterally. And if they require, Russia is happy to provide a platform on which they could meet and discuss these things. Very similar to what happened in 2020 when India and China had a flare up on the borders. If you recall, the
Yeah.
foreign ministers eventually met in Moscow, and that is when the de escalation or diffusion, if you want, started of the tensions. So I personally don't think much should be made out of this, but it is interesting in a different context that after a long time, suddenly Lavrov decided that Russia should restate its position on this.
Mm,
Part of the provocation could be Afghanistan,
mhm.
because Russia is seeking to engage with the Taliban more substantially. And Russia is nowadays of the opinion that India can substantially contribute to the process of engaging the Taliban. So there have been reports that Russia is keen to include uh, India in the Quad format.
Yeah.
Russia wants India to participate more actively in the Moscow format. So
Yeah.
it could all be in that context also.
Why now? Why these remarks now?
That's what I
Is there
said.
any?
I don't think there is anything looming large on the India Pakistan front, at least. So I think this is more in the context of Afghanistan, in the context of the tensions that Pakistan is having with Afghanistan, and in the context of needing to stabilize as a regional issue that Afghanistan needs to be stabilized. There is also the problem of how do you deal with the Taliban, which is non inclusive, which is hostile to participation of women in the workforce, in education. All of these are sort of standards of civil society that the other countries espouse. So, how do we finesse this problem while dealing with the Taliban, even if we are not talking about recognition to the Taliban? So, I think it is in this context that it's more of a signal to Pakistan that look, in bringing India in can help us uh, resolve all the issues that we have with Afghanistan, and you should not be hostile towards the Indians.
Mhm. So, since you mentioned Pakistan, some of Lavrov's other remarks, he referred to Pakistan as a victim and target of terrorism. You find that odd?
No, I don't. I mean, at the point, even we say that while uh, uh, Pakistan is an originator of terrorism as a state, we also
Yeah.
recognize that it has been a victim of terrorism in the sense that there have been terrorist attacks on Pakistani soil. Pakistani people have died. So Pakistan is in that unique position where it is an originator of terrorism, but also a substantial victim of it. Lavrov, at this point of time, is emphasizing the latter because he clearly doesn't want to rile the Pakistanis when he's trying to get them to be more sympathetic to the inclusion of India in the Afghan process.
Hmm. How do you think this would have gone down here in Delhi? Those remarks about Pakistan being a victim and a target, and don't mention at all that it is an originator of terrorism.
No, obviously, in India, we react very sharply and very painfully to such
Hmm.
remarks, and we will be hurt. But given that it is coming from Russia, with whom we've had substantially frank negotiations and discussions at all levels on issues like Pakistan, Afghanistan, and all, we know where they stand, and therefore I think it wouldn't be as painful if suddenly the United States were to declare Pakistan a victim of terrorism.
Hmm.
With the Russians, we are a little less sort of upset with
Prickly.
this kind of remark, although it does hurt us.
Hmm. Let's get on to Afghanistan since we've been, it's so much there in the background. The Lavrov talked of including India in the Afghan Quad, the second Quad. We are outside that right now, but you think it helps, given our own recent outreach to the Taliban, meeting Mutaki in Doha?
I personally think that India is seeking to engage with the Taliban without effectively recognizing it. We recognize that the economic situation is dire in Afghanistan. We would like humanitarian aid to reach large sections of the Afghani population. Uh, and we also recognize that there are some terrorist groups that are still using Afghanistan as a safe haven. And therefore, we would like to engage with the regional efforts. You mentioned Uzbekistan and Russia and other countries, Iran, who
Yeah.
would like to in a combined effort, as it were, find ways and means of stabilizing Afghanistan, not only economically, but also in a security sense. Although, of course, no one is questioning Taliban's ability to control the territory.
Hmm. What do you think India wants right now? We've also been sending humanitarian aid to Kabul, and there's a technical mission also in Kabul. What exactly? I mean, there are incremental steps underway. Are we moving towards a broader political thing in Afghanistan, in tandem perhaps with the Russians?
Well, I think it's not only the Russians or the Indians. I think the Iranians are also seriously engaged with the regime in Afghanistan. You have some uh, GCC countries also involved, UAE. So it is a combined international effort
Hmm.
to reach out to Afghanistan, not allow it to become a terrorist haven, and try and stabilize it. Uh, it is difficult. The Taliban is not helping itself by
Yeah.
being so sectarian. So it's a question of, uh, the international community finding a viable program that allows it to engage. In India's case, of course, uh, we need to walk back a little because, in the immediate aftermath of the withdrawal of the United States, the chaotic withdrawal, if I may call it,
Hmm.
of the United States from Afghanistan, we also, firstly, we were taken by surprise, but in the result of that was we also lost some credibility because we suddenly stopped issuing visas, not just for students and medical help, but even to some of our old friends who helped us when
Yeah.
the Taliban was not in power. And I don't think that has gone in India's favor. So I think we are trying to rebuild some of the lost credibility, although, for the record, it must be admitted that India enjoys a lot of goodwill in Afghanistan.
You think Lavrov's idea about getting India involved in the Afghanistan thing is something that would go down well in Pakistan, given the fact that
But
some of the reports I've read in the Dawn and other
I
papers.
yeah. I think that is precisely what Lavrov is trying to do. He is trying to tell the Pakistanis that, look, Indians can only bring positive to trying to stabilize Afghanistan. Today, you are under pressure from Afghanistan. Your relationship with Afghanistan is on the brink. So, therefore, it is in your interest to stabilize Afghanistan as much as anything else. And the Indians can only contribute positively in this direction. So
Mhm.
I think, these remarks, I would say, are more directed at Pakistan than at us. He understands that the Indians understand the Russian position, so he's not so worried about misinterpretation, but he's trying to reach out to the Pakistanis to tell them that the Indians have a positive contribution to make, and we should not let that fall by the wayside.
Mhm. India has invested close to $3 billion in Afghanistan. And I mean, everybody talks of winning goodwill, but what is the strategic benefit here? What is the strategic gain? It appears to have been entirely lost.
I don't know. I don't know if it is entirely lost. Because in terms of goodwill, we still have a lot of goodwill in Afghan society. I mean,
Mhm.
it's no doubt about it. Yes, we stopped issuing some visas and all, but there is a large section of the Afghan community that still wants to come to India, some to study, some for medical reasons, and many have families here. So there are sort of links that India has with Afghanistan, and we would like to stabilize those. We would like to let them grow. Of course, we have our concerns, but keeping those concerns in mind, we need to engage with Afghanistan, and there's a growing recognition of that in the corridors of power in Delhi. The second thing is that I think India is ready, and the Taliban regime is hopeful that it would be able to talk to India about resuming some of the economic projects that India was involved in. After
Yeah.
all, it is not just security stability, but it's also economic stability that the Taliban is looking at. After all, you need to keep the Afghan population usefully engaged. You need to be able to generate internal revenues and start growing the economy. So there is a lot of scope in that sense. And finally, my neighbor's neighbor should always be my friend. That should govern India's policies.
Mm. Is it the Russian position that the Taliban are stable, long term, and therefore dependable? I mean, how do they wait? We had some awful incidents there in the recent past.
I don't think the Russian position differs from the Indian. I think we believe that and we, and I mean the Russians and the Indians, believe that the Taliban is firmly in power and that is it's here to stay for some time.
Hmm.
So, therefore, this is a reality we have to deal with. And I think a foreign secretary meeting the acting foreign minister recently is a reflection of that understanding. So I don't think there is any significant difference in the assessment of Taliban in Afghanistan. I think we are a little bit more wary about the intensity of outreach that we
Hmm.
want to have. And we are more suspicious of the Taliban. The Russians, uh, at this point, are more governed by their internal situation, but their assessment of the region. There is the prism of competition with the United States, uh,
Yeah.
various elements that are absent in our assessment. So the Russians are keener, maybe, to engage with the Taliban than us. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that we are totally hostile to the idea.
Hmm. So, last question: do you expect a kind of coordinated move, perhaps by India, Russia, Iran, on Afghanistan?
I think if there is a move on Afghanistan, it is going to be broader than the three countries that you mentioned. I think the
Okay.
Central Asian countries would be involved. You know, if you look at the Central Asian response to what transpired in Afghanistan since 21, you had the Tajik opposition.
Yeah.
But Tajik opposition has significantly mellowed. They still host the Afghan opposition, but their
Hmm.
verbalization of their hostility towards the Taliban has come down several notches. And
Hmm.
I think so, you will find a broad spectrum of a variety of countries, probably even UAE, that will all engage. And of course, given the fact that China is a large presence and has a presence on the Afghan border, they would also be involved. So, whatever solution emerges or whatever initiatives come vis-a-vis Afghanistan, I don't think it's going to be purely, bilateral with Afghanistan and some country, but I think there'll be
Hmm.
a combined effort of
Do you
several countries.
expect do you expect diplomatic recognition?
Not in the immediate future, no.
So, what would
Uh,
the Taliban have to do to get around that little block?
Look, let's be clear about one thing. It is not only about gender issues. Even this whole thing about inclusivity.
Yeah.
After all, the Pashtuns are close to 50%, but there are close to 50% of other ethnicities in Afghanistan. And
Yeah.
merely having one representative from the Tajiks or one representative from the Uzbeks in the government, token representation does not mean inclusivity. So I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
the Taliban has a lot of issues it has to address in terms of how it governs uh, Afghanistan, and more so that it does not alienate those other communities so that the uh, ground for terrorism does not become fertile. You want to create a situation where everyone is pulling in the same direction. We've seen what happens when Afghanistan is sort of the haven for various terrorist groups.
Yeah.
You've had attacks across the globe. So I think that is something that all these countries are concerned about, particularly since they are the ones who are likely to be vulnerable. And the Central Asians are particularly concerned about this because uh, with the situation unraveling in Syria, a lot of the fighters who were from Central Asia,
Yeah.
Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, all these countries, they are going back.
Hmm.
And they may be going back to Afghanistan or to their countries. So all these countries are seriously worried, and they need to. They want this situation addressed.
Nandan, we are at the end of our time, and as always, great perspective from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's all we have for you on this conversation. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on social media. Thank you very much. Good day.